Welcome to Rabai Story, where every tale is a gift, told under the rhythm of rain and the roar of thunder. Settle in, let the storm surround you, and let the story unfold. Enjoy the ride. I've always loved antique stores. The kind of places where you find dust-covered treasures, things that have lived long before you, full of history and mystery. A few months ago, I walked into a tiny store on the edge of town. It wasn't much, just an old weathered sign that read Willow's Curiosities and a dim light glowing from inside. The moment I stepped in, a wave of musty air hit me, and I could hear the soft hum of an old clock ticking in the corner. I wandered through the narrow aisles, picking up trinkets, flipping through old books, until something caught my eye. In the back of the store, sitting alone on a rickety shelf, was an old wooden radio. It was a vintage piece, with brass knobs and a curved front, its dark wood polished to a sheen despite its age. The kind of radio you'd expect to see in an old farmhouse or a 1940s movie. The label on the front read Mistral 650, a name I'd never heard of. The soft, almost melodic hum of static surrounded it, as if it were alive. I didn't know why, but I had to have it. The store owner, a frail woman with thin gray hair and a faraway look in her eyes, looked at me with a strange kind of knowing when I approached the radio. "Ah, the Mistral," she said in a soft, raspy voice. "Not many people ask about it. It's been here for decades, you know. You should be careful with it." "Careful?" I chuckled. "It's just an old radio." She didn't smile. "It's not the radio itself, it's what comes through." Her words lingered in the air, but I shrugged them off as nothing more than superstition. I paid for the radio and left, eager to plug it in and see if it worked. When I got home, I set the radio on a small table in the living room, next to the window where the afternoon sunlight filtered through. I plugged it in, turning the knob to power it on. It hummed to life with a soft crackle, and then a voice, a low, garbled voice, filled the room. I leaned in closer, trying to make out the words, but the static was overwhelming. It was like the voice was being drowned by the noise. I fiddled with the tuning knob, but no matter where I turned it, the voice stayed the same, distorted, hollow, unintelligible. I was about to turn it off when I thought I heard something. The voice, faint but clearer this time, said, "You can hear me." I froze, staring at the radio. My heart raced. Was it just a fluke, a broken piece of equipment malfunctioning, or had something truly just spoken? I leaned in closer, now desperate to hear more. The voice came again, this time more distinct. "Help me." I stumbled back, a chill crawling down my spine. I quickly turned the radio off, the sound cutting out abruptly. My fingers trembled as I tried to calm myself. It was just a broken radio, I told myself, a glitch, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, I decided to try it again. I told myself I'd been imagining things. After all, static could make all kinds of noises. I turned the dial, and the radio came to life with its usual static. And then I heard it again. "You're not alone," the voice whispered, barely audible. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat. The room was empty. Just me, the radio, and the unsettling hum of static. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the hiss of white noise filling the room. But I could feel it then, the air thickening, as if something was waiting in the shadows. I turned off the radio again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something had been with me, just on the edge of my senses. For the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I unplugged the radio and left it off, but each time I walked past it, I felt its pull. It was like the radio was calling to me, like it had something to say, something it needed me to hear. And then, one evening, I made the mistake of turning it back on. The voice came again, louder this time, with a hint of panic. "They're coming for me." I stepped closer, my hands shaking as I twisted the tuning knob. I could barely make out the words through the static, but I could hear the fear in the voice, the pleading, the desperation. "Who's coming?" I whispered, my throat dry. The voice answered, but this time, it wasn't the same voice. It was different, raspy, almost guttural, like it was coming from somewhere deep, somewhere far beyond. "They know you've been listening." I pulled away, my heart racing. My skin crawled, and I could feel the room growing colder, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Something was in here with me, and it wasn't just a voice. I grabbed the radio and yanked the plug from the wall, but the sound didn't stop. The radio was still playing, the voice still speaking, even though it wasn't plugged in. "You can't hide from me." The voice sounded right behind me. Panicking, I threw the radio across the room, watching it smash against the wall. The room fell silent. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the room. It wasn't from the radio. It was something real, something breathing. I spun around, my eyes wild, searching for the source of the sound. My mind raced, but I couldn't focus. The laugh wasn't in front of me. It was all around me. In my head, in my ears, in the air itself. You shouldn't have listened. The voice growled, now unmistakably close. Its presence suffocating. Now you're mine. I ran for the door, my legs shaking, but before I could reach the handle, the door slammed shut, locking itself with a deafening thud. I turned around, and the room was different. The walls were darker, the shadows deeper. The radio was no longer smashed against the wall. It was sitting there perfectly intact, humming softly. But the worst part, the voice was no longer coming from the radio. It was coming from behind me. I slowly turned around, my body stiff with terror. And there, standing in the corner of the room, was a figure, tall, dark, and formless. A vague shadow made up of nothing but blackness. Its eyes burned like coals, piercing through the darkness. You should have never listened. It whispered again, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I don't know how much time passed before the police found me, curled up in the corner of my apartment, trembling and babbling incoherently. I couldn't even explain what had happened. The radio was gone, as if it had never been there at all. The officers told me they'd found the door wide open, the windows unlocked, but I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And now, every night, the sound of static haunts me. The whisper of that voice calls to me from somewhere deep within the static, and I can't escape it. I don't know how long I have before it finds me again.